All right, after that quick lesson in audiovisual, nice segue from the last presentation. Winston Wong is going to be talking to us about compliance and getting compliance to make sense in your organisation. First time presenting at XWorld. Everybody give Winston a warm welcome.
Yep, and thanks, Marcus, for the introduction, and I really appreciate AUC selecting me to do this presentation. So being a first time, I might be a bit nervous, but hopefully I can go through, and if there's any questions, do feel free to ask me at the end. So I guess as a quick introduction, I'm part of Marcus and Aaron's team. If you guys already know them, I'm a sales engineer, but my focus is more on the security aspect. And one topic that really comes to heart for me from a security standpoint is really the compliance, and it's been a hot topic for the last couple of years, like especially with Essential 8, CIS, NIST, and all the different type of framework and benchmark that exists. So what I really want to explore today is trying to understand the considerations and what we need to look at it from a compliance standpoint. Why is it important for compliance, and what tools can be used to kind of help you kind of evaluate compliance from a different standpoint. So as I mentioned, as part of this presentation, I'm going to examine the fundamental elements of compliance, the challenge we might be facing with compliance, and how we can use auditing controls to understand how compliance fits in within your business. And then I'll also have some considerations. With those considerations, it might be different for different organization and business. But these are my top pick, so we can obviously evaluate more on it when we get to that point. So why compliance, and why is compliance important? I guess it's relatively straightforward, and most people already know why organization needs compliance. In most cases, compliance doesn't always necessarily mean security. It ultimately stands for adhering to standards and regulatory requirements set forth by agencies, law, authority groups, and governments. So in most cases, the purpose of achieving compliance is to establish risk-based control, to protect data at its core. While it sounds like cybersecurity compliance is just another means to the end to satisfy the ongoing need and requirement of what government and authority dictates or enforce, there is a common notion between what government wants and what business wants. And ultimately, we do want to just secure our data, whether it's from an organizational standpoint or protecting the users from a privacy perspective. There's a joint element to it. So it's not always like we have to listen to what the government wants. It's a joint notion working hand in hand together. And in certain scenarios, with most organizations going through this transition of being compliant, there's obviously legal ramification as well as other needs that we will kind of explore. So beyond obviously protecting data, there's some core principles that go beyond protecting data. So we're looking at trying to mitigate risks within our organization. We want to maintain trust between the user that they are using a secure device within the organization. And with all of that, right, there's multiple avenue of why compliance is important. And in certain scenarios, if organizations are going through actually going through process of getting cybersecurity insurance, one of the things that insurance companies love is you need to satisfy this compliance need. And they look at it as a tick box exercise, but in my perspective, it's more than a tick box exercise. It's an opportunity to refine your security measures within your organization. So before we dive deeper into this compliance topic, what I do want to show is some importance of security. So I keep talking about compliance, and I also mentioned that compliance doesn't necessarily mean security. But in essence, they do work hand in hand, because what you ultimately see is security tools and things that you do in security will end up with an outcome with your organization being compliant. So what I've done is, coming from Jamf, I've just reused some of the statistics that we have as part of our Jamf 360 security report. So these are statistics that are quite interesting that has come about in the last 12 months. So one of the interesting statistics that we found is 57% of users believe malware don't really exist on Mac. However, in reality, we found that, of course, that is not true. 17% of malware sits in the Trojan category, and it represents a significant risk for business. So what we want to know here is the level of control you give to the end users and what they can install on the device from an application standpoint can pose as a potential risk. Obviously, by having compliance and control in place, it will help to a certain degree mitigate from those risks that are exposed. And the final factor to this is obviously beyond applications and vulnerabilities that are exposed on device, we also see that 20% of organizations were impacted by malicious traffic. These malicious traffic might not be coming from applications specifically. It could be coming from users going to malicious site, or not just malicious site, non-accepted sites that might redirect the users to more malicious activities that threat actors are trying to trick the users to go to. So what this really means for compliance in 2024 is ultimately we're going to see compliance being a forefront for most people in this room. Like everyone, I think it's not going to be a topic that you guys haven't explored. It's going to be a common theme for all organizations. And with the evolving regulatory environment, cybersecurity compliance is going to be more and more challenging. But that it's not all gloom and doom here. So what we are going to be exploring in the couple of slides moving forward is what are the available tools available for the for organization as well as business to evaluate to kind of improve the compliance baseline as well as the compliance posture. So I know, as I mentioned, compliance is a relatively intricate kind of topic. As I also mentioned before, it's not going to be a tick box exercise. Some people do look at it as a tick box exercise, but it's also going to be an ever-changing need. There's going to be a lot of reiterations that are required as part of that journey to be compliant. So what I mentioned, and these are some of the common challenges that we see. And one of the ones is enforcing and maintaining once-off exercise. It's not going to be that once-off exercise. It's not going to be a checkbox exercise. A lot of business will potentially be met with resource constraint when they look at compliance, and not having the right expertise within the organization might hinder that conversation within the business, as well as talking to management why we need compliance. So with all of these kind of like constraints and challenges that might exist, what we can kind of deliberate from this experience is there are actually tools and there are frameworks. And kind of relating back to John's presentation, there's many frameworks that he's already mentioned as part of his previous presentation. So I'm not going to go into it in too much depth, but technically there are multiple different type of framework, benchmark that can be used to elevate your general compliance posture within the organization. So we got CIS, very common, NIST, DISA. This might be quite the most common one in Australia and ANZ is Essential 8, and we also have Information Security, ISM. So with all of these framework and benchmark, these are here for you to assist you in reviewing your internal policies and procedure. There is no standardization when you use these framework. It's not, again, going back to what I mentioned, not a tick box exercise. There's not going to be, you're going to have rules different between different users within the business. It might be, but these are going to be edge case scenarios. What you would need to do when you look at compliance and applying those type of framework within organization is a standardization. A standardization doesn't mean that just because that user is part of the IT team, this user is part of the development team, they will have rights that are beyond other controls with users within other aspects of the business. So enforcement and standardization is very important. With compliance, it's going to be a joint effort. I think one of the biggest challenge, if anyone in this room is a CISO, is obviously getting buy-in from the business. So it's very crucial that there is a joint effort, a collaborative effort within the organization, that it has to come from top down, it has to be accepted within the business. Enough buy-in. I know there's going to be pushback with different users within the business, but it is a joint effort and a collaborative effort that comes from top down when we talk about compliance. So we've kind of explored a bit on obviously all the different type, why we need compliance, the different type of compliance framework, but it also brings up a tricky question. When we look at compliance, there's a lot of different type of rules and controls that exist. Those rules might not be easily differentiated because there's going to be different use case and different personas within the organization. So what I want to showcase, and I think most, and if not all, have already heard about this tool, is the Jamf Compliance Editor. So this is a handy little tool. This is built on the foundations of the Mac OS Security Compliance Project, the MSCP, hosted and governed by the United States government agency, NIST, and is hosted within a GitHub repository. So there's, it's a handy little tool to evaluate your experience when you want to align with a compliance framework. And what we're going to do as part of this presentation, I'm going to just do a light demo. Most people might know some of these features, but if not, we're going to explore holistically where these features come in handy for your auditing purpose when you are trying to align with a compliance framework. So what we have here is the Jamf Compliance Editor tool. You can, I will share the link, and if you guys don't already have the link, I'll share the link to the actual site to download the tool. It is a free tool. There's no cost associated to the Jamf Compliance Editor. There's actually two elements when you first open Jamf Compliance Editor. There's both macOS as well as iOS. So there are hardening controls that help with securing your mobile devices. But more importantly, we're focusing on the macOS aspect. So the first thing you would want to do is create a new project. With Compliance Editor, what you have here is you have a selection of all the different type of macOS operating systems that exist. Not every organization, well, technically they should be on the latest Sonoma, the latest and the greatest, but there are going to be business for different specific use case where they'll be running different operating systems. So once you selected your operating system, you'll choose a location to create the compliance editor or to save the configuration profiles that will be created. And then after this is created, you do have a selection of all the different type of frameworks that Jamf Compliance Editor as part of the MSCP project supports. As you can see, these are common frameworks as well as benchmark that we were exploring. You got NIST, DISA, you got different levels of CIS. But what I'll do is I'll just focus on CIS V8 as a kind of a starting ground. So once you have started up Jamf Compliance Editor, save the location, what you will see is a nice little breakdown of all the different sections or different aspect of the device that you can enforce controls. So these sections are broken up by auditing, administration, can't even see which one that is. Oh, iCloud, macOS, password policy, and system settings. There's various different sections that helps you break out all the different type of controls that exist as part of CIS. But more interestingly, when you look at each of these individual rules, you will be opened up with a lot more information that's available. So you got a title for that specific control. You got a discussion point to explain the rule and how the rule actually impacts the environment. The check that will be used and used to validate that specific control if it's actually enforced on the device. It also gives a nice breakdown and reference as well as an actual fix to the different type of framework that this specific rule will align to. So plenty of ample of information, but more specifically, certain controls will also have what we call ODV, a organizational defined value. This value will obviously change and be different based on the specific requirement of your business. So just throwing out an example would be like your screen time. How long before a device goes to sleep? It's going to be different. It's not going to be a standardized rule you might have for every single business. So by having that ODV value, you can actually create something that is designed specifically to your requirements of your organization. So with CIS V8 that I've selected, there's over 175 rules. Again, dependent on the tools and applications or as well as the specific use case within an organization, they might not be fully all applicable. But if you do want to build a baseline, usually I will select all of them and then kind of work through the different type of exemptions that might be in place. And then I'll showcase more of that once we actually leverage the tool in more in-depth angle. So once the rules and the different types of controls are selected, what you can do is recreate what we call a guideline. So what the guideline does is it does a couple of things. It uses all the rules and controls that you have selected. It'll create documentation, configuration profiles, as well as different settings that can be used with your MDM of choice to enforce those additional value to control to the fleet of devices. So we're going to explore a couple of things here. Once the guideline is created, one of the most important things when we talk about compliance is obviously auditing and reporting. So with Jamf Compliance Editor, they have created a very handy PDF document. So based on the rules as well as the different type of configurations that you have, it will list out all of this in a very nice documented way. It's worthwhile because with these type of documentation, you can hand it to your cyber security insurance to kind of validate what controls are actually in place and kind of elevate and keep track of what is important to the business. So as I mentioned, there's 175 control, but it gives you a very detailed breakdown. So again, for documentation or auditing purpose, it's quite useful to have. Beyond what is available with the documentation, when we go back to the Finder, what you'll see is there's a lot of different type of configuration profiles and preferences that are set up based on the rules that you have. And these configuration profiles, which are structured in P-lists, can be uploaded to your MDM to be enforced. But there is considerations when you look at all of this preferences here. So another nice, nifty capability of Jamf Compliance Editor is its auditing capability. So there is an auditing capability built into the Compliance Editor. It allows you to evaluate your existing environment or the existing device and that device that belongs to the organization. So if you don't want to use the MDM, which I'll showcase a bit later, there is a manual process of auditing your device as well. So second, I think a final part what I'll showcase and how this will help you from your auditing journey is there is a feature where you can upload directly to Jamf Pro. So in this case, coming from Jamf. But what I will do is actually showcase this. So with the upload functionality of Jamf Compliance Editor, it actually does a couple of things. So with all the rules that are actually set in Jamf Compliance Editor, it actually uploads a script directly to Jamf Pro. This script, I have a lot of scripts, actually creates all the different type of controls as well as those checks that I was showing you in those rules. And what it does is there's a couple of different options of leveraging this specific script. In Jamf specifically, you can use the policy control to enable the script, and then you can set the parameter to a check state. And whenever the device checks in with Jamf Pro, what it does is it will go through the script to evaluate the conditions and the rules that you have set on the device. And then it reports back to Jamf Pro through our extension attribute. So there are extension attributes that are also similarly created as part of the upload. It's always a bit tricky. And these are broken down into a couple of different criteria. So we got what I was mentioning before, a exemption. This is obviously a specific use case within the business that might be exempted because there's a use of maybe airdrop. And then you got a list of specific rules that the device might not be satisfied, as well as a fail count, as well as a specific version. With the tool, you can obviously have multiple different set of rules based on specific criteria that can be used across different device fleet, and you can use the smart group to define those specific device that will get those policies. So what's the final outcome here is when the script is set to the policy state, what it does is it will report on all the specific control. So this is just a test device that I have. I don't have minimum control across it, but it gives you a breakdown of specific rules as part of CISVA that you might not be satisfied. It gives you an overall count. And then using this information, you can then kind of simulate where the gaps are. Are the gaps make sense and it doesn't align with other tools within your organization that you're using. Not every single rule is going to be applicable because you'll be using other mechanism in place to satisfy that specific rule. So for example, if you're obviously looking at identity, so you got Platform SSO, you got Jamf Connect, you got Xcred. These are all different mechanisms to tie in with your cloud identity provider. So it might not make sense to have MFA as a default setting. So these are some of the considerations that you might look into. But in short, this is just kind of a high-level example to show you what the capabilities you have in terms of auditing your environment. Every environment is going to be different. Every single rule and reporting will be different, but this is showing you the capability and the tool that is available to do so. So I'll just jump back. Sweet. So with that kind of overview of Compliance Editor, I think this might be quite interesting. What about Essential 8? I think the whole kind of demo that I talked about Compliance Editor, there wasn't really too much mention about Essential 8. And ultimately, Essential 8 is a big kind of important factor that we should take into consideration. But there are general challenges with Essential 8, and some of them that you guys might already know is it's not overly prescriptive on the specific control or how to achieve the desired outcome. It's really just telling you this is the desired state. You can use however imagination you want to achieve that desired state. So it's not prescriptive in nature in comparison to what CIS, NIST has in terms of the rules and controls that they have in place. And more importantly, it is kind of very heavily skewed towards Microsoft Windows-based system, with Essential 8 focusing on Mac. So there's an element that there's Essential 8, people say it's written for Windows, but ASD has done a lot of good jobs with Apple to actually do hardening guides for iOS platform as well. But there is obviously a deliberation here. There's a lot of controls and requirement as part of those strategies that are very skewed towards Windows more than Mac. But these are still considerations that we'll be exploring a bit more. But that's, again, it's not at the end of the day, end of the world. So CIS and ASD has done an amazing job at doing compliance mapping. Based on the rules and controls that exist within CIS as well as ISM, they've done a mapping exercise to kind of help map the controls that exist in CIS to Essential 8. So if you use CIS, it will help you elevate your control to meet and satisfy the criteria of CIS as well. And I'm a strong believer that there's no single compliance framework that will solve all problems. I think there's a balance, and when we look at security as a tool to achieve that compliance outcome, when we look at all of these controls, they all benefit organizations. So it's important to kind of evaluate. Don't just say, I have to follow Essential 8. You can use it can be a balancing exercise using different compliance framework to achieve the desired outcome, and which is to protect and secure your environment. So beyond Jamf Compliance Editor, I know we kind of, I keep mentioning with CIS, there's around 175 control. It's always great to have a comprehensive list of controls that you can kind of work on and then deliberate whether it's actually beneficial for the organization. But there's going to be stuff that goes beyond what Compliance Editor or CIS wants you to do. And these aren't just supported natively out of the box. There will be tools and consideration beyond what a control can be done on a Mac device. So in the next couple of slides, we're going to be exploring some additional consideration that by no means this is not the most comprehensive list, but this is just considerations that I strongly believe are relevant, but there will be more. And I think John also mentioned a couple of great use cases, and one of the questions was about application control. That is not part of it, but I do believe application control does hold a very significant value as a consideration, dependent on whether your business is suitable to use it or not. So I think the first one is quite straightforward. Yes. Double click too much. Thanks, Dan. So cloud identity is one of the core and most simple. I think most businesses are moving towards using cloud identity providers such as Microsoft Entra, Okta, Google, or the likes of all the different vendors that exist. With cloud identity, it's important because it revolves around permission, roles, safeguarding that level of control, and also kind of helps as they expand into different realms of looking at risk level of the device based on the identity. So with modern authentication for device and application access with users working remotely, cloud identity becomes a very important aspect of consideration if you guys are not already using it. But there's also different areas of context that we need to look at from the cloud identity standpoint. So you got privileged access, context-aware access based on the device state. These are all different controls that you can enforce to level your actual control plane. And it also aligns with another similar concept which I'll go into in terms of consideration is the zero trust principle. Is you should control your privileged access based on who should have access. So the least privileged model as part of zero trust. So it kind of overlaps with that, but I'll talk about that in the later slide. The second type of consideration is more about vulnerability reporting. So vulnerability reporting generally just gives you a better risk overview of your organization's data, asset, and reputation. It helps understand where your organization currently stands in terms of what vulnerability exists. It helps them mold in to improve security controls because you know where the gaps are. Once you know where the certain software needs to be up to date, there's always this handy rule dependent on what organization you're in or industry you're in. There's N-1, but then N-1 might not work in most certain scenario when there is an exploit that is very dangerous to the organization. So vulnerability reporting helps in the mindset for improving security reporting, but also for auditing and governance purpose. The third consideration we have is on insight and telemetry. So that is evaluating, obviously, collecting and capturing meaningful insight across your device fleet. This essence of collecting information, we're not trying to go down the path of surveying your end user. It's mainly focused on detecting, reporting, and then planning and executing on those detected flaws that could happen within your device fleet. Also, it's also handy as a way for forensic investigation. So reviewing what is already exposed or what has exposed as a way to understand what improvements can be enforced. And in certain cases, it also helps to automate certain capabilities as part of your workflows or playbooks that you might have in place. Content filtering. This might be a bit contentious, but I do believe content filtering enforcing a certain level of acceptable use policy for corporate device is quite important. It's also beyond ensuring that users follow rules. It's also helping protect the certain Joe Blow on what they do look at. So it's a kind of a safeguard, a wall to protect them as much as they believe that they know what they're doing. It is important as a kind of a baseline to help them. And in certain cases, it can kind of go back to my point about surveying and monitoring. I think for corporate compliance, I look at it holistically. I don't think there's any IT admin out there that's willing to monitor every single activity for a user. So what they do is they look at it holistically so they can actually apply control and use data-driven insight to make those controls more applicable within the business. And then finally, it goes back to one of the points that I mentioned when we were talking about cloud identity is zero trust. So the principle stays the same. Organizations are continuously evaluating and evolving with the different rapid changes in technology, and the legacy trust models are kind of ineffective in essence. So by leveraging zero trust principle of least privileged access, continuous authentication and strict inspection will become a critical consideration for business if they are not already on that journey of trying to apply the different elements of zero trust. Whether it's zero trust on device, zero trust over the network, these are all elements and principles that will help to tighten your security control within the business. A final takeaway, I think, as we explore about compliance and security is it's not going to be, keep mentioning this, it's not going to be a tick box exercise. It's going to be a reiterative process. There's going to be regular risk assessment. There's going to be a buy-in within the business. Employees and training awareness is going to be important. And then monitoring and continuously improving it will always be a foundation of trying to align with compliance. And as I mentioned, the additional considerations should be taken into account. Those are just high level of what I believe will help elevate that compliance and security, but there are more. And if you guys are interested, do come have a chat with me. I think there's more that I can share. But I think that does it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Winston. Do we have any questions?
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, first of all, Winston, just for the presentation. That was awesome. This is a question more for the room. Just because airdrops now come up twice, I'd just like to see a show of hands of who currently blocks airdrop in their organization. Cool. So I assume the rest of us don't? Excellent. Just wanted to get my own head checked. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Not a technical question. The last slide you had employee training, and some certification organisations require a cybersecurity awareness amongst employees. Do you have a go-to training course that you recommend for people? Some people are working for charities, and they might want free cybersecurity training for their employees. Is there anything in that space, or could I throw that to the room as well?
In terms of like just general training, I think great resources that exist, like those common platforms like Udemy, Academy. Some of them have great just baseline training material. Can get a bit technical, but also there are definitely a lot of free courses. I'll need to dig through it. I do have a list of some of these free courses that might be beneficial for those specific use cases where they might be tight on budget. But yeah, there's plenty of resources out there. I only can think of a couple. But yeah, I think anyone else have any good suggestions, I guess, for just the AWS?
AWS just put out a free one. AWS.
For the recording, AWS have got a good free resource.
Cisco also have some really good free ones online as well.
All right, cool. Yeah, just a question on JCE itself. How often does that pull from the central repo? Is it on a schedule? Because I've seen a few bugs creep in here and there that sort of take a little while to flow through the application itself.
I think it's based on specific version when we release and the developer or
I didn't necessarily know I'd get a.
I think on launch
Yeah.
polls to check to see if there's any version
Yeah, right.
of MSCP. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Marcus is an expert here. Thanks.
Marcus is not an expert. He knows experts.
Just with the JCE, they also said on Slack a couple of weeks ago that when there's quite a few changes, it's better to start a new project and start from scratch and just re-tick the tick boxes than to constantly update.
Thanks, Cameron.
I will just put a note on that PDF and spreadsheet is a equivalent of the PDF. That's actually built live. So if you selected just a custom amount of those rules, it actually makes that PDF with those rules. It's not all 175.
Yes, I purposely selected 135, for example. I don't think many people will want to read that many documentation, but yeah, Dan's correct. It is adaptable, and as I mentioned, those controls might not be fully applicable for every single business. So deliberation and understanding what is right and applicable is going to be important as part of the process, but it's a handy tool to start off as a baseline.
You can also brand documentation.
Yes.
For the recording, yes, you can also brand the documentation. Yeah, very useful.
Yeah.